Guys, thank you for coming back to another episode of the Hashtag Real Estate Podcast. We're also doing some video content now. So, hey, everyone on YouTube, Instagram, whatever you're watching on. Today, we've got Jake Lasko here with Defiance Capital. We're super excited. For a lot of you that don't know me or not in the Tulsa area, Jake works for Defiance Capital. I'll let him explain it in just a moment. But he's been a really big asset in my investing career, getting started. I mean, we talked like before I'd even done my first deal and things like that. And we've got deals on the books right now that we're getting done. So I'm thankful to you guys. So Jake, just give us a little bit about you and your company.
You bet. Yeah. So Defiance Capital was founded back in August of 2020 on the principle that the Tulsa market and for geography purposes, Defiance Capital lends within Tulsa Metro, as well as many of the great other surrounding communities, Skiatook, Glenpool, Broken Arrow. So, we're not geographically stuck just doing stuff in Tulsa. Mm-hmm. And came to found Defiance Capital after doing traditional commercial lending and seeing a lot of change in banking over 14 years, seeing a lot of change in market conditions, and honestly, having a really good friend who has been a real estate investor in Tulsa for some time, who reached out to me and said, I think Tulsa could use some additional resources and additional capital to help investors grow. Insert a client like Cylas, who was newer, but had a lot of hunger and a lot of desire to get his footing. And so we had the chance to work through a deal or two together early on. Cylas was able to kind of continue to grow and now has circled back, and we continue to find ways to work together. Yeah. We work with a variety of clients, and we don't have geographical restrictions. We know Tulsa hopefully as well as you do, and we can have really good, honest conversations.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's definitely one of the best pieces of this, and we've talked about this before, is that, if I send a deal your way, I mean, that area, ARVs, what cost of rehab is going to be, and it's kind of like that second, check that, this is going to make sense, it's going to work. Like, we've had conversations, there have been deals I've looked at that have been kind of slim, and we've talked about, is this the same numbers? We're getting on the same numbers, and we've kind of worked through, some of that. And that's the real facts of it, that some deals are going to come across and some deals are home runs and other deals are, you can be really great, but there's X factors that can cause ups and downs and things like that. So for someone that's never heard of hard money lending, can you explain to them what that is and when would be a good time to use hard money?
One of the things I will say is I'm very aware and sensitive to maybe a perception that investors have of hard money, because there's such a variety of ways private lending, hard money lending, alternative lending looks. And I know a lot of investors may have had different experiences along the way. Private capital in of itself is a great tool to help you, and it should be easy money. I was actually just at lunch with a client and talking about how when you work with a hard money lender, they should make your life easy. It's a bridge loan. I'm going to be offering you financing anywhere from 6 to 12 months. So within that, if I'm not making that transaction easy for you, there may be somebody out there who can. Yeah. And my background in traditional lending leads me to be real client-centric and real conversational with how I develop the relationships. I guess intentional is a good word to use. And I know that intentionality is kind of the reason that we connected originally was because we were having good chats. You wanted to learn. So for sure. The great thing about hard money private lending is anybody can use it for any reason. We are very open to working with a newer investor looking to potentially get into the next thing for them. Maybe they've house hacked and now they want to take on just their own single family project. We work with experienced experienced investors who have used other sources of capital. Maybe they've had a good relationship with a banker. Maybe they've had some family and friends money they've used, and potentially then maybe some of their own capital as they've grown their portfolio. But they still are looking to scale their business.
Yeah.
And so hard money can be a great scaling tool for that kind of an investor. And then lastly, sometimes we can be a really good asset for a historically strong cash buyer. Someone who's always had their own money. They've not relied on any lending sources, but now they're realizing that they're limited. All of a sudden, they can only do one project a quarter or two projects a year. And they now have some horizon they want to get to, some goal, and it may take them twice as long buying all in cash.
Right.
But if they leverage a hard money partner or an alternative private lending partner, all of a sudden they can grow that in a way different way, in a way faster than they ever thought possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the huge piece to this, that people that are just investing or haven't used hard money private lending like this before, like you said, is so perfect. It's the scalability. It's the you've got $100K and you got to buy a house that's $100K and put 25 in it. You're short 25, but we can partner together. We can work together. And now, I'm putting down a much smaller amount of that, a percentage of that sales price, and then we have, the repair costs in there. And that means if you find another deal, you don't have to pass up on it. Yeah. And one thing I'm really big on as an investor that I think a lot of people do, but they don't maybe necessarily think of it the same way. I'm thinking about the return on my actual cash. It's not just that end amount that I made. It's like, what did I put in and what did I get out? Correct. Because to me, the whole thing with real estate investing and other alternative ways in the stock market is I need to know that my returns are better than me sitting in the stock market. Yeah. And if I can't beat that, this is way harder.
Correct.
than a mutual fund. This is much more active. I think the funny word that gets passed around is passive income, and I don't know anyone in real estate that is not pretty active with that investment, whether it be networking with people for years before you find that deal with them or whatever, you know what I mean? But I think that's funny. But for me, that's what it really comes down to is my use of my time. I need to see if I want to put money into it, I want to see the percent return. And it's not uncommon to get, 100% returns plus returns on your money when you leverage and use the hard money, which I think is that's the most important piece to this.
And it's a conversation I have especially with a newer investor. Yeah. Potentially somebody maybe even stuck in the analysis paralysis phase of trying to figure out how to get to that first deal. Yeah. Let me look at that address. Let's talk about that very thing, cash on cash return. Yeah. And let's talk about what do you want out of this? What, a conversation as you develop and invest in is, what do you want to pay yourself per month, right? So let's say you're buying a $100,000 house and it needs $25,000 of rehab, and potentially the ARV is $175,000. So after financing fees and after holding costs and then all of your closing fees with brokers to sell it, maybe that's going to be a $30,000 margin for 6 months. So is making $30,000 in 6 months enough for you right now? Is that a good starting point? Again, that's going to be a different answer. That's not a pointing question to you, Cylas, right? But that's just an inward thought that an investor needs to have beyond the analysis paralysis. But what is your time worth, right? Because 2022 has not been exactly favorable to the stock market, but on average, right, the stock market is always considered a safe place to grow your money and wealth. So how does real estate trump that in a way that's positive for your ability? Because there is nothing passive about getting into a real estate transaction,
especially not like this, not the flips and all that stuff. That that's very active and so I think so. What would you say is the ideal person that would want to use hard money, or a ideal client for you guys?
Well, I don't think there's an ideal person. I think there's maybe more the thought is, what does the ideal deal look like?
Yeah.
What does the property look like? And so, let's talk about Tulsa. Let's talk about kind of the range Tulsa has, right? You can go anywhere from like a historic Owen Park, Brady Heights, where maybe you're going to spend a little bit more, but you're trying to rehab an historic house, and you're going to attract a different kind of buyer because potentially that's more of a flip area.
Yeah,
you. Potentially, then you're talking to folks who want to invest in Midtown around TU. There's a different kind of property that you're going to buy there.
For sure.
So, that's where the conversation comes in, like what is the ideal deal? And I will tell you, it's really any house that's around 1,000 square feet to about 2,200, 2,300 square feet. Mm-hmm. And honestly, that sweet spot is, 1,700, 3 beds, 2 baths. It's got maybe a 1-car garage or a carport, and it's going to rent for, let's say, about $1,400 a month, right? I mean, that is a real typical kind of deal that people are going to come to me for because, A, the down payment's not going to be too substantial.
Right.
And we'll definitely talk a little more about kind of the terms of when you work with a hard money lender.
Yeah.
Specifically kind of the way we do it at Defiance Capital. But, and it also then with a good partner, then you're getting that rehab funds. So again, then what does that cash on cash return look like? It looks pretty good.
Yeah.
Typically in that scenario.
For sure. And a great thing about that is, the property you describe right now, that's a huge piece of market share for the area. Yeah. The general people that are buying are looking for a similar house to that. That's, master bedroom, they got 2 kids, in these specific areas. So I think, for people listening, when you talk to, someone that's doing private hard money lending like this, and you get their parameters, that's really good stuff for you to listen to. Like you can set your buy box pretty dang close to that because you're doing it all day long. You're looking at numbers all day long. Yeah. You know what a deal is going to be really good and most likely for you to do well on. Yeah. Going to sell quickly because that's just as, that's a pretty important piece to this. When people are doing this, like you want a product that's going to move. You don't want to sit on it because it makes it harder on you.
It does. Yeah. So, that's the profile of the house. But again, within that, there's going to be smaller properties and potentially something that I think is unique to Tulsa that we see a lot of is folks buying houses and then doing a garage conversion.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of that as an option. So you're buying 1,000 square foot house that maybe it's a 2-2 and it's got a 1-car garage that's probably about 250 square feet. Well, maybe that's another bed and another half bath. So now all of a sudden you've got a 2.5, and that can attract a different kind of buyer.
Yeah.
And then maybe you even take the next step and you spend a couple grand and you put a carport then outside of that so that your buyer still has something to park the car under. Because,
sure.
I think later in the conversation we'll kind of talk about where the market is and what we're seeing with the transactions that we're closing on right now. But there's definitely some nuances to the market that are going to attract a buyer as this market transitions.
Yeah. Let's go right into that. Let's talk about the marketing kind of. How does your business adjust in a market like this? Is it more conservative?
Sure. Well, of course, it has to be. It has to be more direct conversation about ARVs because you follow a Facebook page, you follow a wholesaler, you get some numbers, and in some markets, like 2020, 2021, the trend and the appreciation was there for you to buy something and catch up to where the ARV was. Now that we see the interest rates affecting people's purchasing power, and it's affecting an investor's ability to generate cash flow on a month-to-month basis because now their debt service that they're going to be paying to the bank has increased.
Yeah.
On average, a buyer has lost about 40% of their buying power.
Yeah.
So what does that mean for ARVs? Well, that means the ARV conversation has to be, we need to cut that back maybe 20%.
Yeah.
Because the person buying it has lost potentially 40% of their buying power.
Yeah.
And so that's a big swing. But we also face, I think, in Tulsa still a shortage and an inventory problem to where there still is not a ton of new listings or new rentals readily available for somebody moving here or somebody wanting to move up.
Yeah. Man, I was talking to another agent about this earlier. Like, I feel like we're in this just such an interesting space where it's like um, we can foresee the things that the government might be doing, but it's hard to even tell what that's gonna do if it does happen. Like we're seeing shortages, rents are still going up. So when people are tired of renting, they want to buy, but now buying is, the actual price of their monthly payments going up, but then the prices are going down. So the people that were, upset and didn't want to spend over the asking price cash, like that makes them happy. But it's just like, I feel like we're in this tornado of like, every day we get more data, and I don't know if that is a good or bad data for it, because it's like, okay, well, the price is going to go down. Great for investors. We can hop out there and maybe get a little bit better sales price. There's not as many buyers on the market.
Right.
Then you look at the stats and like, there's, not that much supply to keep up, with it. So it's like this, it's just like this weird, I feel like weird headspace right now of like, every 2 hours I'm like, oh, it's a great time. I'm going to keep pushing forward fully. And then the next hour I'm like, oh man, should I be holding cash? Should I be, so I mean, and on that side, how does that make it difficult to you? Do you, and so you started in 2020, but you've been in commercial prior to that.
Right.
How long had you been a commercial?
So for 14 years. So
Okay.
I've got some experience with the market cycle.
Yeah.
I was dealing in commercial lending during the 08, 09, 2010 turn down and all the ramification that had. I was more on the business side. I didn't have a ton of investor portfolio at that point with the bank I worked at, but still experiencing some of those heartaches. And again, this is a very different feel because some of the fundamentals that caused the 08, 09 crash are not there.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot to learn about what long-term effect this inflation and the interest rate environment has on the household and on people's budgets and their ability to keep their house. And, even back in August of 2020, I still remember we always preach to people the worst word that people hate is patience.
Yeah.
Right. As a real estate investor, you either are in some sort of analysis paralysis and you just can't figure out how to get to the first deal, or you just don't want to start. You want to buy everything. You get a wholesale email from somebody like, I need to buy that yesterday. And
he's talking about me.
I am. And I love our first deal was you wanted it so bad. I think you had actually finished rehabbing it before you even closed on it. Remember that on 26th Street?
Oh, yes. So
you were so impatient you couldn't even wait to close the loan to fix up the house.
That is a crazy story. So
we don't have to go into details. That's not the way I want to see people take it down.
I won't go into
again, the patience word is something that I know investors have a hard time. Because maybe you're watching some TED Talks, maybe you're doing some podcasts, maybe you're listening to these guys that are just talking about how you just got to get that first deal.
Yeah.
And you have any brand, you just got to get the first deal. And I don't blame you. Like I wanted my first deal as Defiance Capital. I couldn't wait to be able to close that first deal. But from there, having the patience to help clients find the right deal is far more important to me. Mutual success is very important to Defiance Capital and to how I develop the relationships that I have with the investor community in Tulsa.
For sure. And I want to speak to that just as a client testimonial. I mean, there's been properties that we looked at and that, there's questions asked that in business, like you have to keep an open mind. Like you're not asking me these questions to challenge me or anything like that. You're just making like, hey, is this square footage going to come? This kind of looks small. Is this square footage right? Are you sure on that? And there was like, there was actually a deal that we had looked at that I think we ended up like not because we were just like, oh yeah. No, it did not.
Measured differently than we thought.
Yeah, and that that makes a difference. And this is a price per square foot game where we use that heavily because we want to match what the appraisers are doing, and it makes a really big difference. I want to touch a little bit on the commercial side in 2008 when that because you don't really ever hear like that side. So what was that like? Did it affect the commercial side of things very much? What was what was that time period like?
That time period, it was very challenging because all the conversations with your clients were just about how are they going to survive? What plan do they have in place to figure out how to get through this? Working with a mom and pop steel manufacturing company or working with some sort of a retail company, or even worse, some sort of a restaurant or tourism business, which is super challenging in a recession, because again, a recession has created a lack of disposable income. Without disposable income, people are not going to be doing the splurges. They're not taking the trips. They're not buying the extra pair of shoes. And so, that I was on that trickle down effect side, where I'm working with a small business owner.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Who's got to struggle because their business is down. And then they also have the house that's now worth less.
Yeah.
And, a lot of my clients did have to choose some sort of kind of a strategic bankruptcy plan, a strategic foreclosure plan to kind of get them through it, because there was not going to be the resources to get the business to the point where the personal finances could then afford that.
Yeah. And so for people, like we're coming up 16 years later, so someone might be listening to this that has no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us what type of things happened during that time that was the kind of foundation of what caused that issue?
Yeah, so this was created in most parts by a housing crisis due to mortgage companies and the approval process they were going through at that time. So, there was a lack of oversight and a lack of diligence done on buyers, on properties. Honestly, the story, that still goes around is that some mortgage companies were lending to dead people.
Oh, wow.
That they didn't know had passed away, but they got the social and the name, and they just wanted to approve it. Again, it was a total transaction market that had no market foundation to why it happened.
And you heard things like they would do stated incomes.
Correct.
And so, people could come in and say, I make $250, and we're getting loans essentially off of that.
Yeah.
And so, just because, and were they so lenient on this because they're wanting to stimulate the economy, or do you recall why they were just lending so much and wanting to just give so much money out?
Namely, Cylas, we talk about capitalism, and sometimes within capitalism comes the ugly G word of greed.
Okay.
And so some of these mortgage companies just saw the potential to help anybody they could buy a house so that they could profit from that.
Gotcha.
And maybe even early on, maybe they wanted to profit off of the fact that they knew they were making a bad loan that they would take back and then sell.
Yeah.
Predatory, right?
Yeah.
That's very predatory.
Yeah.
And again, so then, of course, as an investor, listening to a guy who's now doing hard money and private lending, right? I'm not doing a lot of income verification. That's not the name of the game when you work with a hard money lender. Yeah. We do check out liquidity levels. Obviously, if you've got some project experience, or potentially very common I see is a contractor or a tradesperson who has done the work for an investor, and now they want to figure out what it's like to be the investor themselves. So that's also very common. So, those types of clients also have a great competitive advantage because they've got some network within the trades to help them finish the project, probably at a pretty good price because they're in it. It's potentially even
another thing too. It's not like you do some vetting on the person. It is easier than a traditional loan, but also you are looking at that asset heavily too.
Yeah.
Like you guys,
right.
For people that are learning about this and getting into it, like you need to be at a certain percent of ARV.
Right. And I think, and again, going back to differences in the kinds of lenders that are out there in the hard money space, we specifically work off of your costs. Everything is going to be loan to cost. And so if all you've ever done before is potentially buy a primary residence and your lender's talking about loan to value, that's not a conversation that we necessarily have when you work with Defiance Capital.
Yeah.
I'm lending you, a maximum of 90% of your project costs or your purchase cost. Mm-hmm. But again, it depends on the type of deal, depends on the kind of property. And again, if you're a buy and hold compared to a flip, there's just going to be conversations that are had. Because I think it's great. You and I are actually working on kind of one of each now.
Yeah.
And so we've had two different conversations about each project because each one's going to have its own risk levels right now.
For sure.
Because of where the market is. Yeah. And so, that's where the market expertise comes in and why I drive around Tulsa
Yeah.
and I check out neighborhoods, and we have a lot of loans on the books.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly getting new addresses in different parts of Tulsa. That also allows us to then have our own organic data
Yeah.
to think about how we're going to help the next
For sure.
client.
For sure.